Hey everyone, this is Jim
And Charles.
from Valves and More, an online vintage tube store. And today in Tube Lab number 208, we're going to talk about cathode followers. Well, cathode followers revisited. But first, caution everyone, electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult a professional technician when in doubt. And before I forget, there's a new video up on our other channel, Millitone Amps, in which we talk a little bit about
A whole bunch of the different PCBs that we've made over the ages.
yeah, and we're going to actually be releasing a fairly complex Phono PCB. Anyways, if you like
Building your own amps or designing your own circuits, anything like that, we supply the PCBs, and in most cases we have schematics to go with them, so you can work with them off that.
yeah, so I'll put a link below to that video. Well, we recently finalized the circuit for the new version of our Universal 6 or 12 SL7 kit Phono preamp.
The modern line version.
You've jumped ahead of the script, which will come out on the new modern line chassis. It will be easier and faster to build, and best of all, will cost much less than the classic line version. And I think that the modern line chassis is kind of sexy too. So,
Oh yeah, it's great looking.
yeah. We could have made exactly the same circuit, but we thought, why not try and make some improvements? The original version sounds amazing, so we left the gain stages alone. Here's the gain stages here. That's the 6SL7. And we focused our work on making a cathode follower stage that could use the excellent Soviet-made 6N6P, probably the most underrated tube currently available for reasonable money, but not for long, of course. After a couple of weeks of steady work, lots of butt scratching.
I think that's supposed to be head scratching.
Well, yeah, okay. No details required. We ended up with, maybe I think with the lower end, but anyways. We ended up with improved power supply filtration, not something that we had intended on, and a cathode follower, or CF stage as many call it, that could use a number of very different twin triodes. Okay, so let's take a look at the circuit, and then we'll look at those tubes that you can roll in. So let's see if we can focus. Can we focus a little bit more? That's about it. So as I mentioned a minute ago, this is your input, and these are your gain stages.
And they basically haven't changed.
They haven't changed, and they sound amazing. But what we did do some work on is the cathode follower. Now, in brief, a cathode follower is a low impedance output stage. You'll find cathode followers on most preamps, and
And as in-between stages on integrated amps as well.
yeah, interstage couples. Yeah, absolutely. And what that basically does is it gives us very low impedance here and allows us to easily go into a higher impedance, let's say, control preamp. And it's pretty much a required, because if we were to take the impedance off of the output of the last gain stage, which is right here, here's the coupling cap. So if we took the signal right here and dropped it onto the RCA out, we'd have something in the neighborhood of 20,000 K ohms. Sorry, 20,000 ohms. Also, you could also say that as 20 K ohms, yeah? And that is a lot of impedance. Typically, you don't want to have, you want to have about a maximum of 1,000 ohms, maybe 1,200, 1,400 ohms as your output. So 20,000 is just way too much. And it won't work well going into, let's say, a 47K or 50K input stage. And let's take a quick look over here and see exactly how this circuit works. So
there is actually something missing here that's over on the power supply schematic. We have a resistor that is feeding the cathode follower stage on the other end of this, on the B+ supply.
yeah, and I'll show you why in just a second. So here's our high gain, high impedance signal coming off of our last gain stage. We land on the input grid of the cathode follower tube. Now this is of course a stereo preamp, so what we're doing is we're using 1/2 of the cathode follower tube, right? Because the vast majority of tubes in use these days are twin triodes, right? So there's 2 tubes inside that single glass envelope. It's awfully convenient for design work, let me tell you. It compacts the number of tubes in the circuit dramatically. So the signal comes in here. Now you might say, Jim, it looks like you're taking the signal off of the plate on both the gain stages, and that's true. So we have a high impedance, high gain stage. If we take the signal off the cathode way down here, all of a sudden the impedance is very low, and it will depend on the tube in the circuit as to how low it's going to be, but it's going to be very low. And we also end up with something called unity gain, or unity gain minus. And unity gain just means that whatever the signal going in value is, that's going to be roughly the signal coming out, minus a little bit. We lose a little bit due to inefficiency. Now, in the case of the universal phono preamp, the gain stages and the EQ circuit give us approximately 1 volt RMS. And we get out approximately 1 volt RMS. Going in practice is a little bit more, and
going out will be just a little bit less than that.
Yeah, and it's also going to depend, of course, on what the tubes are in the gain stage and what the tube is in the cathode follower stage. So here we've got essentially a resistor up here that is dropping the B+, but it's also helping regulate the current flow in this particular tube. And that is important in stabilizing many tubes in the cathode follower spot. Charles is going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. This is a grid leak resistor that just makes sure that any stray electrons that end up on the grid that shouldn't be there, that's DC, that they leak back to ground eventually.
And it's also referencing the grid to this midpoint. So it's treating this as if this is the ground in terms of the grid and the cathode.
Yep. And here's our cathode resistor that helps set the operating point. And here is essentially the plate resistor flipped. So if you look over here, you'll see we've got 150K as a plate resistor. And down here we have an 18K. And the signal gets taken off of what we call the union right here, or junction. And we go through a coupling cap, right, because we don't want any DC present on the output stage. And Bob's your uncle. Now, Charles, there's something that you have to be really careful about with cathode followers.
Yeah, so let me get in here. So we actually ran into this issue during development, because initially what we did is we essentially copied the original Phono circuit, which was designed to take the 6SN7 or 12SN7 tube. And we swapped in the 6N6P. Now, the 6N6P is a great replacement in almost every respect, but it had one change that really caused some problems for us. And it's called the heater cathode voltage rating. So what that is the differential between how much voltage is seen at the cathode and how much voltage is seen on the heaters. So in this case, we've got 6-volt heaters, and we have a cathode that's rated around 104 volts. So we're seeing approximately 98 volts difference, somewhere in that area. And that is well within the requirements or the ratings for all the tubes that we can run in here right now. But it wasn't the case before. And it was causing some weird stuff to happen with the amplifier. I mean,
basically what happens is because the cathode is essentially wrapped around the filament, and heats up. That's where the source of your electrons come from. People will refer to that as the electrons boiling off of the surface of the cathode. And the cathode coating is actually designed to provide a source of electrons. And what happens is...
There's a shield between the two, but it's not perfect.
It's not perfect, and they have to be very, very close to each other. So essentially you start conducting across.
Yep. So if there's a big enough voltage difference, you'll start conducting. The 6SN7 GTA, I believe, is rated for 200 volts combined DC and AC. And the 6N6P, I think, was rated for 150. And we weren't quite getting to that before with the previous design, but we were close. And being close was just enough to start causing problems. A lot of instability.
Sometimes we'd be unstable.
And sometimes we weren't, which was, driving us absolutely nuts.
So one of the rules that we've learned that we will apply for future design work is that you really can't be close to the maximum on that particular rating. Sometimes you can push ratings right to the edge of what the specifications say.
And sometimes you got to be well within it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And occasionally you can even go over. Caution. Don't try that at home.
You might see some sparks fly and some tubes die.
Yeah, I mean, we're professionals. And I remember when we were doing development work on the GU50. Oh my God, we were
arcing quite a bit.
We had lightning bolts inside our tubes until we finally figured out exactly what our circuit was going to end up being.
Yeah, it was very exciting.
Yeah.
So the way that we solved it here with these tubes, this heater cathode voltage, is we basically just dropped the voltage that was coming to the cathode follower to a much more reasonable 218 volts. And that is what that other plate resistor is for, the one that's not actually shown here. That drops this voltage down. It drops the total current being used by the tube as well, and it makes the whole thing a little bit more stable, a little quieter, and it gets that cathode voltage down to something more reasonable.
Now, what is the really interesting things that we ended up creating, partly by accident and partly out of necessity? The sound changed.
Yeah, it changed quite a bit. It sounded great before, but now it's just so much better. It's clearer in the bass. It's very detailed, very punchy. I think our output improved slightly as well.
But really, even though the actual EQ sweep of the bass frequencies stayed roughly the same, we now have a very, very, very clean, pronounced bass sound.
Yeah, probably defined as a tight bottom end there.
Yeah, and now for quite a while now, we've been designing cathode followers with the idea that we need to put work into the cathode followers because it really affects the definition of the very low end.
Yeah. It affects a lot more than a lot of people online would have you believe.
And that leads us into the next segment of today's show, and that's to show you tubes that you could roll into this particular cathode follower stage. Something we've never really talked about, rolling cathode follower tubes.
Yeah. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have probably already spotted this list right here. And these are all the ones that we've tested so far. So these are all V3 tubes. V3 is our cathode follower tube in the amplifier. And we can run the 6BZ7, 6BQ7, which we'll take a look at in a bit. The 6N6P, of course. The 6N1P, which is one of our other favorite voltage gain dual triodes, but has a good bit of current too.
And we've never used it as a cathode follower.
Yeah. The 6CG7, which is just a 6SN7 in a 9-pin bottle, essentially, and the 6GU7, which is a close cousin of the 6CG7. And these all work beautifully in there. So you have lots of options, and you only need one tube with matched sections in that spot.
Now, this is probably, I say probably because we always reserve the right to make future improvements, the final schematic for what will be the modern line Phono preamp. But there is an important power supply schematic that goes with this. So if you're one of the builders that clones our designs, doesn't buy a kit, that's fine. That's why we put this stuff out there. We understand a lot of people want to do their own thing, do their own chassis, or they just don't have the money to pay for a kit proper. Don't build yet, because when we actually are ready to release the kit, we're going to release the full schematics, and they'll go up as they always do under the information section. You're going to want to see that power supply because it's different, it's special, and I think it's a part of the reason why the low end in particular improved.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's take a look at some of those tubes that you talked about, Charles.
Okay, we'll be right back.
Okay, so we've got a selection of tubes that are all rated for the cathode follower slot of the new Phono preamp, and they all share a couple of similarities, right, Charles?
Yeah.
So they're all twin triodes.
All twin triodes, all on a 9-pin base with the same base pin out.
Yeah, and the base pin out, in case you don't know, is the same one that the 6DJ8 types use.
Yeah, I believe it's the 9A, although there are some revisions on the end depending on if you have a center tap heater or if you have a ground shield.
Yeah. Now, what you can't do is sub the other base type that's common, which is the 12AU7 base type. It's got a completely different filament system, and it's always best to stay in the same general family of pinout.
Well, technically they will work, but we don't have a 12-volt supply on these. If you had the 6AU7, it would work.
Yeah, and the other thing that's very common among these tubes is that they're all essentially medium U tubes, right?
Yeah, medium to high medium. It's, that category has changed so much over the years. It used to be that medium U was somewhere around 15 gain, and then medium U eventually became around 35.
Yeah.
So it's a big difference.
Yeah, well, back in the day, a high gain tube might have a mu of 35, whereas today a high mu tube has a gain of about 100.
Yeah, and there are some that go even higher than that.
Yeah. Okay, so what have you got, Charles?
All right, well, we're going to start over here with a tongue saw. It's always nice finding new old stock tongue saw tubes, especially ones that aren't really being used much by anybody. And this is a 6BZ7. So this is one of these small 9-pin dual triodes that you can use as a cathode follower. And these actually also work in the gain stage of the new 6N1P preamp on the modern line that we're going to be releasing as well. And they're just beautiful tubes. They're tiny. They got these tiny little plates, but do they ever glow? A lot of them have filament bridges. They look really nice. They sound great. And they work great as a cathode follower as well. And next up we have another 6BZ7. And this one was made by RCA. And
in fact, you're going to put that into the system.
Yeah, and you're going to be able to listen to it in a little bit here, along with another RCA tube I'm about to show you. And, whenever we first tested the amp with these tubes and there was a cathode follower, we were just like, wow, does it ever sound good? It just made such a big difference. And RCA made great tubes, and they had their own house sound, just like Sylvania did.
Yeah, there's definitely... I wouldn't say all RCAs have a sort of a warm, it's almost a welcoming sound. Mm-hmm. It's almost like the Sonics want to wrap you up in a warm blanket.
Yeah, it's great for smooth jazz, easy listening stuff. But guitar players love them in their amps as well for adding some warmth to the tone. And here we've got the 6N1P, which is roughly the Soviet equivalent of these 6BZ7s, another 9-pin dual triode, and another one of our favorite tubes that we're using in the 6N1P preamp. And it just works great in there.
In fact, that tube has given that preamp what will be its production name.
I didn't know if we were going to reveal that yet.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So this tube has a rocket logo on it.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's pretty faded on this guy. I'll see if maybe I can get it on screen there.
So, and this tube was probably played a significant role in the Soviet space program, which is where the rockets came from. And it just has a very unique sound. So anyways, the modern line 6N1P preamp that's coming out is going to be called the Rocket.
Yep. It's a very fast, clean sound. It's very dynamic, and it's high gain.
And it's also a very open sound. If you do any recording or listen into mastering of vintage jazz records, they all all the better recordings have a very kind of open sound with some space around the instruments and vocals, and the 6N1P has got all of that in spades.
Oh yeah, it really helps bring it out.
Okay, what's next?
Next we have another, this is a 6CG7, so again it's a 9-pin equivalent of a 6SN7.
So
And-
it just, if you're going to use it as an octal, it just needs a simple adapter that we carry. In fact, we sell a lot of those adapters. In the last year in particular, the 9-pin to octal adapters that we have, it's just crazy. I think we just sold 4 yesterday.
Well, it just shows how more and more people are looking to adapt because of the cost of expensive octal 6SN7 tubes.
And it can increase your range of tubes that you can roll in, vintage tubes, quality vintage tubes, dramatically.
Yep.
So I think it's been quite a revelation to many people how good the 9-pins can sound.
Yeah.
They're definitely different than the octals. They've got,
Which is a good thing. They have their own unique sound to them. It's not the same old thing.
yeah.
Yeah, and so this is one of the RCA versions. For a while, we've sort of specialized in what's called the clear top version, which has a side getter and a clear dome. But this is, of course, the chrome dome version of the same tube, and otherwise they appear to be identical on the inside. And we've got enough of these in use to make up a number of matched pairs that are in the store now, and they're great sounding tubes. We're trying to branch out a little bit more into some different 6CG7s, and we'll talk about them as they come in.
Yeah, because we have a huge number of, particularly of good vintage used ones. So we were sorting through hundreds of them over the last month, and
trying to
slowly,
match them up.
slowly over time, we're getting them in the store. And the last one is what I was saying is probably the most underrated tube currently available for reasonable money, and that's the Soviet-made 6N6P.
Yep.
And this thing can push current.
Well, you can see it's been running for a bit.
Yeah.
It's toasting our label.
Yeah. In fact, these things are so powerful that you could use them as small power amp tubes.
Yep.
Albeit very small. But because they're very efficient at pushing current, if you look at the plate structure of any tube that can handle some more current, you'll see that they're often quite open and designed to cope with heat.
Yeah, whenever this is lamped, you can actually see the filament lamped inside of here. It glows really quite nicely.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, this is the tube we use in the coming rocket preamp as the cathode follower.
It can also roll in there as a preamp tube too. So they're fantastic. They're versatile. They were well made and made in large quantities, and so they're a great tube to work with.
Yeah. So I would now. I guess there should be a big caution. You can't just roll any tube into any cathode follower. And if you were following earlier, you'll understand that current regulation is a big part of the cathode follower circuit design, as well as Charles was talking about the importance of having the voltages of the cathode and the filament to be within spec. So it's not safe to just plug any old tube into any old cathode. Just because the pinout is the same and it looks like a cool tube to try, I really don't recommend that. You could end up with damage in your amp. You could end up with a fire in your amp. So be really careful about that.
Yeah, we do all this weird testing so you don't have to.
Yeah, that's right. And as always, we're looking for tubes off the beaten path that are more affordable, that aren't boutique expensive tubes, that sound like boutique expensive tubes. And I think that is the path forward. That, of course, is why we're developing more and more kit amps. It's why our kit amp business last year doubled. And we've got a big announcement to make, but that's still a month away, I think, or almost a month away. And
We'll get to it.
we're going to get to it.
Okay, but before that, though, we have some music to listen to. So let's pop over to the listening room, and we'll see you back here in a bit.
George Benson.
Well, it's been a fairly slow week. We actually have a lot of really nice stuff coming in. But Charles was working away on the 6 CG7s, and we were talking about these RCAs.
Yeah, I already spoiled them a little bit here. So like I was saying earlier, we managed to get in a nice number of used ones. Actually, probably, maybe half of them are new old stock, but we've got them all mixed in together, and they didn't come with boxes, so we're treating them like they're used. And these are beautiful sounding tubes. They tested great. They're low noise. Again, they can be adapted into any spot that takes a 6SN7 with one of these 9-pin octal adapters that we also carry.
Yeah, be careful. There's quite a few varieties of 9-pin octal adapters. A lot of customers will send us a note saying, my adapter's not working. Well, it's because it's not the right adapter, right? There's different pinouts for different bass types and different tubes. And we only carry one 9-pin to octal adapter, and that's for tubes like the 6CG7, the 6GU7,
6N1P, 6N6P. None of the adapters that are designed to bring a 12AU7 to like a 6-volt socket are going to work. Don't even try those.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got, I think we actually have 5 nice matched pairs of these guys in the store, along with some great testing close match singles if you're looking for a single of those tubes. And yeah, they're in there, they're ready to go, they're already cleared, and we're hoping to get them into some of your hands.
Yeah, and if you stayed this long, here's some discount codes to help you out. There's a secret code that people have been grabbing left, right, and center. It costs us a lot of money, but I always like to see returning customers and viewers like you grabbing the codes. And we can reach almost everyone around the world with flat rate $20 shipping. If you're in a difficult to ship region, send us a note before you order, particularly island nations. And you'll know if you're everybody in South America is tough to ship to. So, and if your order's $150 or more after the discount, the shipping's on us, folks. Stay safe, everyone. This is Jim.
And Charles.
Signing off. Cheers, everyone.